Okay, well, thank you for fitting me in this time slot. I'm a little happy to be here. And I was at Emory for 30 years and working on our collection at the museum because I was a curator and a professor. And it gave me a lot of things to do research on. And I've become fascinated with what are often called entheogens, which would mean things that someone believes take them to the divine level. Theo for God, or the divine, entheogen, engen, kind of what engenders the divine, and that's a cultural characteristic. In the Americas, do I push this? Yeah. In the Americas, plants are often entheogenic, and we can call them entheogens. They are ingested so that they will change the consciousness of a person, and this is considered to be a sacred, not a recreational activity. So there are more than 100 of them in the Americas naturally occurring, and they, in ingesting a plant, I worked with a shaman who said to me, I tell people, you don't drink the plant drinks you. Which is one of those kind of Zen paradoxes, but the idea that when it goes inside of you, you are part of it, and there's this dual unity entity. So this is just repeating the abstract, but I've become interested in the overlap of images of people as they feel that they turn into animals when they ingest these very strong, what we might call psychedelics or hallucinogens. I find those are loaded terms, so I tend to stick to the entheogens. And that they can meld their selves with the plant itself. Not just what animals they might feel they turn into, but the images will meld plants and the people who ingest them at the same time. And it happens that this little guy, person, thing, entity, is about that big. It's on display in a case that's about people who we might categorize as disabled. We have certain categories of conditions that we consider different from the norm and may be difficult to deal with, and we call them disabilities. In the Americas, people who look different and have different experiences of their bodies and the world are usually elevated rather than denigrated. So this little person has both breasts and an erect phallus and is, I would say, an example of a person we would call intersexed, that we have a medical category for. I am not trying to pathologize and I'm not trying to diagnose into the past, but there are a series of characteristics. Now, most of us don't have both the secondary sexual characteristics of the two sexes. And that this person is also being conflated with a mushroom. And there are sacred mushrooms that change your consciousness. The mushrooms are amongst the hundreds of plants. So we have what we call peyote. We have what we call San Pedro cactus. Here are your names if you like those. San Pedro, St. Peter is the saint that opens the gates to heaven. So that's why Trichocereus, Pachinoi, and other species are called the San Pedro cactus. Banisteriopsis kaapi, the major ingredient in ayahuasca, Anadenanthera. There are just hundreds and hundreds of these. But instead of being seen as evil or frightening or wrong or illegal or blah, 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 they are seen as opening the door. The same, another shaman that I worked with said, it's not from just eating the plant or drinking it. He said that the plant doesn't do it. The spirit of the plant does it. And all the spirit does is open you up to the other realms that already exist. So they don't see it as this direct, you take it and then something happens to your brain. So we have to be aware that there's many different ways to look at what plants do that are cultural and sacred and religious. This idea of shamanism, in which you go into trance to find cures for other people, medicinal cures. I don't know if you can see it, it's a little washed out. But this is the Siberian, the Mongolian shaman. They did not use plants. They went into trance with drums and other things. but he is fighting, his eyes are rolled back, and he's fighting spirits that he is perceiving. The Americas were peopled primarily from the Bering Strait, straight from that area where he comes from, the Altai, and brought with them the idea of trance, but here in the Americas, finding the hundreds of entheogens, it turned into a religion that had to do with ingesting plants. Now mushrooms, there's one type of plant that did go across from Siberia into the Arctic and down into the Americas, and that's Amanita muscaria, which is the toadstool. It's the traditional red with the white dots that represents all mushrooms to many people. We have images of them with their white bumps, and people who are shown as smaller than the mushroom. They're a pretty big mushroom, but they're not bigger than us. So that's a symbol of how important they are, and I think even shows the idea of under the influence of. They're under the influence. And this can't be really tested, but there are a lot of Panamanian plates. This mushroom goes all the way down, and these Panamanian plates that have a shaft like a stem and a big circular top, and the Amanita muscaria goes from being convex to being concave, just like this form. So I think the mushrooms are important as they come down. Some other people have worked on this, a guy named Gordon Wasson, who found images with the white dots and the red tops popping out of the heads of figures or as the heads of figures, all through ancient American art. This one, I don't know if you can see the black and white one up there. The mushrooms are coming out of the eyes of the person. Visions are primarily visual, as much as they are other senses are enhanced. So I'm not the first one to look for these mushrooms, but psilocybin and stropharia are the magic mushrooms that people talk about. They are much more spindly and small, and they have caps that are always convex. Sometimes they're very pointed, and sometimes they're more rounded. And they occur all the way through any of these parts of the Americas. So they're ubiquitous as an entheogen. They pop up at night, they grow very quickly, and they are that's part of their magic, is that they just appear when there weren't any the day before. Boom, they're there. Very famous shaman who died, Maria Sabina, from the Oaxacan area of Mexico. She talks about the world beyond us, where everything is known, and the sacred mushroom took her by the hand. She was the unfortunate hostess of the Beatles, and they came down to take this stuff without any training or any religious orientation toward it, and actually those kinds of things ruined her life. And it's a delicate world, it's a different worldview, and you can't just sort of barge in like that. But that's the kind of stuff that happened in the 60s. This is another piece in our collection where I think you would see that the cap on this little person that is also a slit drum looks very much like a mushroom cap. And one of the effects that mushrooms have very often is a lot of percussive beats and sounds coming from different places. So I think it's very logical that it would have to do with the drum. There are different figures like these that are embroidered, where what they're holding looks very much like a mushroom. That's from Peru. So the idea of a figure like this as a mushroom is not unique. This is a piece that comes from Costa Rica. It's about 1,500 or 1,600 years old. You can see that besides the sexual characteristics, it is also what is called kyphotic, hunchbacked in traditional terms, but that's kyphosis is the medical term. And a student of mine started doing research on being intersexed, and we call it Klinefelters syndrome. And it is something where a child starts out as male, apparently male, and during adolescence grows breasts. There are various characteristics. You might not think that these were very much breasts. They could just be nipples, but in ancient American art, you don't have a lot of bodacious tatas. So this is definitely, they don't put them on men, they don't put the nipples on men, and it is very clearly and sexually male. What's interesting is that Klinefelter syndrome does not tend to, has a lot of sexual repercussions in which erectile dysfunction is very strong, smaller than normal genitalia, lots of ways in which it's an extra female chromosome in a man, basically. And this is a drawing, and that will give you many of the characteristics. In the list, it doesn't talk about the elongated arms and legs, but it tends to go with longer than usual limbs. And these other things that you can read, they say lower IQ. There's an issue with the function of the brain. It's not very verbal, but it's more visual. More visually acute, less verbal. IQ tests verbal. It's not a visual test. So I think this is one reason that someone with Klinefelters, besides miraculously turning into both sexes, which wouldn't be considered as strange, it would be considered, wow, you're everything. You've got it all. And you could be a shaman that would cure both men and women because you're more, not less. And I think it would predispose a person to having visions. So it is actually occurs in 1 out of 650 men. So it's much more prominent than one might think, which means that it could be illustrated. Not very often, but there are other intersexed beings that are illustrated. So why a mushroom? I think the spindly, the longer limbs, I think the tall, you can see the proportions are pretty long and tall with a fairly small head. And I know this sounds bizarre in a Western way of thinking, but if someone were born with, and this is throughout my work on disabilities, when someone is born with certain characteristics, they're considered to already be like a deer. If they have, say, a split lip, like a muzzle on a deer, that's an indication of being deer-like. And to us, it's not like you look like a monkey. That's a Western negative idea, because animals and plants are beautiful and perfect. And if we look like them, that's a good thing in shamanic thought. And I think this transforming, suddenly becoming something different from one day to the next almost, like the mushrooms that pop up. And then if a person already had a predisposition to visions and they took the mushrooms, I think it would enhance that whole element. It would be a predisposition from culturally, like, oh, you're good at seeing things, you should enhance that and open more doors and portals to the rest of the cosmos. And just to show you with the drumming and the sounds of that other piece I showed, this is a person who's drumming on a mushroom. So they're combining as if the mushroom were the drum. These are people dancing around with their arms around each other, dancing around a giant mushroom. This occurs in a lot of different cultures, not just this Costa Rican culture. These used to be called umbrellas. They didn't have nylon rain gear 2,000 years ago. So a woman under the mushroom, this is one of my favorites, a little dog, and the person with his arm around very companionably, but also he is subsumed by the mushroom experience as he's going to the other side. And even one of the major Aztec gods, it's called Xochitl, it's the god of flower, poetry, song, and art. And other people recognize that this person and his base were covered with entheogens. Each one of these different patterns are a different type. The mushroom is like a cross-section. If you cut your mushrooms, just saute them, it's this shape right here. So that flower, song, and art also shade into visions and imagination. So it's on a continuum. And finally, the Spanish invaders vilified these so that they turned into something negative and something evil and something wrong and out of control and the opposite of Christianity. And so this is a colonial illustration of mushrooms with a little devilish bird-headed person on it. So they were considered to be talking to the devil. But the fact that it's a person that's part bird is a vow to the experience where you transform. When you ingest these entheogens, you take on animal forms. But I wanted to point out the ways in which a person can take on a plant form when they ingest the plant, and that there can be a unity between the plant and the human in the indigenous American thought. Thank you.